Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Foresight TV. I just got back from CES in Las Vegas. It has changed so much. It's so great. We're going to be talking about it on Tech Tuesday next week. And I've got some posts that I'll be writing about it. Today I've got Justin Wray with me with Jaybird. Before we get started, I just want to start by saying thank you so much for joining us today at Foresight TV. I know actually that Foresight is not the place for everybody, but if you are in senior living and you're committed to creating great experiences for residents, team members, and family members, we have got great content. So I'm just so glad you are here because it really means you are committed to making the lives of other people better. Well, I would love to hear from you about what you're doing. I'd love to even potentially have you on as a guest. So if you've got a story to tell, I actually have somebody I'm talking to later today who reached out and said, I think I got a story to tell. And so we're always looking for great guests who are also committed to making the lives of people who live and work in senior living better. And if you've got an idea about things we should be talking about, I'd love to hear about that too. So in addition to Foresight TV, we do lots of other great content, tons and tons of posts on LinkedIn. We've got the Foresight podcast. We've got Tech Tuesday that we also do on LinkedIn. The most impactful thing that we do is the Foresight website where we publish new leadership content every day. It's free. It's easy to subscribe to. It'll make your organization better. Just this week, I've had emails from 2 or 3 CEOs talking about how they're using articles to help improve the quality of care for their residents. The QR code is up on the screen, and you can simply scan it, put it in your mobile device, and with your mobile device or tablet, the link is in the chat. I appreciate your passion for the industry, and with that, let's get started. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Justin, welcome. Let's start with a little bit about who you are and who Jaybird is.
Well, perfect. Well, thank you for having me on. As you said, my name is Justin. I am the president with Jaybird Senior Living. I have been in senior housing for a hot minute, since 2006. So my journey has been unique in the sense that I started off as a busser inside a community and have been extremely fortunate in my career to have been given a lot of opportunities. So I tell everyone I've done pretty much every role that is non-clinical, unless I'm playing a nurse on TV. Other than that, that's kind of my journey throughout the industry is. And then with Jaybird, we are currently operating 38 communities, predominantly in the Midwest, 6 states to be exact, as we start entering into some of these new markets at this moment. So we operate independent livings, assisted livings, memory cares across the board. And our focus is really, when you think about the landscape of the industry, we have a high density in the middle market sector of our business, and then we tiptoe in some of the other pieces as well.
Great. So I should have backed up and started with this, but the thing that sort of inspired, and I love serendipity because you never know what'll start a conversation or continue down a path, right? But the thing that actually got me connected with you is there was this crazy story that I guess it's sort of funny in retrospect. I think it was a Sunday morning or maybe Friday morning, and I see this headline about chainsaw wielding maniac attacks senior living. I mean, it's probably not quite that inflammatory, but something along that line, right? And that was communities. And so let's just talk a little bit about what happened there and how it resolved.
Sure. Yeah. So you can imagine when I get a phone call, anytime on a weekend, you kind of already get that pit in your stomach, like, I hope everything's okay. And I got a phone call from our vice president of clinical who said, Justin, there is someone in the community and they have a chainsaw. And I'm like, interesting. Okay. And then she ended the conversation with, and they think they heard gunshots. And so, I'm sitting here in Dallas. This community is in a suburb of Chicago. And I'm like, and she goes, and that's all we have right now. I'm going to work on getting some more information. So, minutes start feeling like hours, and hours starts feeling like an eternity. But ultimately, yeah, we had a individual. This was a Sunday morning, to your point, at 8:30 in the morning. The residents were in the dining room having their breakfast, and an individual who was clearly not necessarily in his right mind entered the community with a chainsaw. Thankfully, the chainsaw was never turned on, and we were super fortunate for the local police who responded very quickly in order to kind of subdue the individual and get it to the point where the residents were safe.
And as I understand it, you actually had one resident who was a military veteran who actually tried to confront this to keep everybody else safe.
Yeah, so I had an opportunity to chat with him once I arrived, and he had this, military background, and ultimately said, Justin, I was sitting there in the dining room. I could tell that this individual could potentially hurt someone. And he said, and my first instinct was to leave the dining room, create a distraction that he would ultimately follow me and put the rest of the residents in a safe nature. And so this resident ultimately distracted the individual, and the individual chased after him. And that's when the police stepped in.
That's great. And he actually got some sort of tiny injury, as I think I understand the story, but it wasn't significant. So
yeah, we had two residents that had very minor injuries, but ultimately, he sat down and he goes, I deserve to have the Purple Heart Award now, Justin. So how are you going to make that happen?
That's right. That's a great question. So let's. I'd like to talk a little bit more about Jaybird, and what is it that sort of distinguishes Jaybird? What's your secret sauce?
Yeah, I think Jaybird has been around for some time. I mean, originally it was Senior Housing Management, and then it was purchased in 2019 and rebranded to Jaybird. And I think there's several pieces to kind of what has driven our success. I think at the heart of it all is we are reminded each and every day that we are taking care of someone's loved one. And as we were chatting before jumping on here, Jaybird was our chairman's mom's nickname. And the whole purpose there, and what we remind our team members, is it's a gentle reminder for us at all times to recognize that we are caring for individuals' loved ones. So I think that's the forefront of everything that we do. And when I think about kind of where we're at and where we're headed is, as I made mention, that we believe in the middle market. We believe in these secondary communities that don't have a ton of resources. And we want to make sure that we continue to be those resources for those individuals. And so that's kind of been a lot about how Jaybird's kind of ultimate focus has been. In addition, our landscape of communities is made up of owned properties as well as third-party managed. And I think that becomes a really important piece. We still maintain, of the 38 properties, we own more than we third-party manage, and we continue to make that a priority, because I think at the end of the day, our focus has to be on making sure that we have longevity and stability. And obviously, when you own the assets, you have just that.
Yeah, I want to sort of back up to the thing that this whole idea of Jaybird and taking some care of somebody else's loved one. I've written extensively about it over the last 2 months, but I had a 2-month senior living consumer journey with my stepfather that was frankly pretty awful. And he's back home now. He may or may not need to at some point in time go back in. He won't go back to where he was before. They could have created a much better experience. But the thing that really struck me about my experience, aside from sort of the poor quality of care he got, was that the senior living organization treated him as if he were the customer. And the truth of the matter is I was actually the customer all along. I was made the decision to move him into senior living. I made the decision to move him into that senior living, and I write all the checks for it, and I made the decision to move him out of the community. And I was treated as, well, I was like, the only thing I counted for was to be able to write a check out of it. And I've come to realize that even in really good senior living organizations, I don't think the family members get enough attention. And so I sort of love to hear your thoughts on that, because it sounds like you guys have figured that out.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely, it's always going to be that walking the fine line, right? Of making sure that we're communicating enough, making sure that we're following through on the residents' wishes, and also taking into consideration the family's wishes, and kind of how that ultimately all melds together. And sometimes it melds together extremely well, and other times we run through that. I think one of the things when we think about our family members is it has a lot to do with making sure that we're keeping them informed, because I think most root issues of anything, right, is the lack of communication, which can lend to individuals kind of developing their own story of what's happening with their loved one in the community. And so one of the things that we've done is we've definitely have recently focused on implementing technology. We have really focused on making sure that we're bringing residents and their families into the community. And really, it becomes a piece of our journey with our team members to really get to know the families and understand expectations. And I think that's one of the pieces during kind of that move-in process and beyond, is you really have to understand, like, what is the goal of the resident, but what is also the goal of the family member? How do they want to be involved? And doing your best to tailor in accordance with that.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that that's so important. Talk to me a little bit about the middle market. As you know, Nick a few years ago came out with this report looking at the middle market, and the consensus of it was that there was this huge crisis of middle market. I have always been a bit of a skeptic on it, honestly, because we don't see people on the street. But I also recognize that the middle market is a challenge. It's a challenge to operate profitably with reasonable margins. There are a lot of people out there that don't have enough money, and it would appear that that as rates go up, that's a growing problem. So talk to me just about how you see the middle market, where you see the solutions are.
Yeah, so the way we take a look at the middle market is, one part of it is just location. And so you have a lot of operators that just don't find it attractive to go into these tiny towns where you have 1,000 or 2,000 individuals. And so I think that's the first piece of it, is you have to be willing to go and venture into the far rural spots that are just underserved at the end of the day. And I think some of the maybe I'll start with challenges and then where we see the opportunities. I mean, the challenges is you are in a small market. So the reality is your staffing and the ability to have the necessary team members is a really probably the single hardest issue that we ultimately come across. I would also argue that it's also the benefit of being in a small town, because you can also be the employer and probably one of the larger employers in the town and be the employer of choice. So that's the benefit from that perspective. But as we take a look at it, yeah, costs continue to rise. We continue to see and wonder, like, how are our seniors going to be able to afford this? And so some of the ways in which we're really focused on margins is we love to be able to buy properties and operate properties in clusters so that we can share resources. Because as you can imagine, when you're in 1,000 or 2,000 person town, you're not building 150 units, you're building a 35 to 60 unit building. And you don't necessarily need the full staffing model that you need in a larger campus style. So we've really kind of had a lot of success in kind of the shared resources. And then it also allows for our team members to learn other buildings and be able to kind of expand their own knowledge base as well.
Cool. So I know that you, as we talked in preparing for this, that you talked a little bit about your focus on the dimensions of wellness initially for your residents and then also your team members. So let's actually start. I'd love to hear your thoughts a little bit on how you approach that with your residents, and then let's move to the team members.
Yeah, so we have two different programs. We have our program that is geared more towards your independent living and assisted living, which is called our Ascend Wellness Program, and it's really focused on the 6 dimensions of wellness. And then the other one we have is our Indigo Wings, which is a Montessori-based programming for those living in our Alzheimer's and dementia care. And when we look at programming, to us, like our buildings, again, kind of going back to this middle market, is they're not usually super amenity rich. And so what gives people purpose in their day? And for us, it's programming. I think it is the single-handedly most important thing that we do in our communities, is making sure that our residents are engaged. And that's why we ultimately just in 2024 kind of revamped the entire program, and we're still in the process of continuing to have that program evolve. But then as we were doing and kind of working through this revamp of the program, we said, we put so much emphasis around dimensions of wellness for our residents, but I really took a step back and told our entire team, like, we also have a responsibility to encourage wellness for our team members. And the reality of the matter is a lot of our team members haven't always grown up, understanding wellness in general. And, I think wellness means something different to every single person. And I think that's what's great about the 6 dimensions. So as we go into 2025, we're in the process of rolling out and giving our team members tools in which they can ultimately choose to live their life maybe a little bit more on the wellness side.
And how are people responding to that?
So we did our kickoff call for this actually earlier this week. And I would say it's been really well received. I'm obviously very interested to see, how it ultimately plays out, and time will tell. But I think at the end of the day, I feel really optimistic because people want to be invested in. People want to know that you care. And at the root of what we do is we care for people. And the people is not just the residents we take care of. It's the employees and our team members. It's a human business, and we have to make sure we always keep that in the forefront.
Well, what I really love is, and you almost stole the words out of my mouth, but what I really love about it is there's two components, right? So the first component is the wellness activities itself. That actually means they're going to feel better. But I guess I would argue is the thing that you mentioned, and that's that by doing this, what they're hearing, the meta message is, we care about you enough to pay attention, to think about these things for you as a team member, as somebody who's really important to us. And I think that is a huge value. Doing any, so I'm going to be really excited to kind of hear where that goes. As you think about both retention and hiring, you have any tricks or things that you're doing in those areas that we could talk about?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with something that we rolled out a year ago now, is we added on a nurse triage program to our organization in January of 2024. And that has been extremely beneficial from the standpoint of recruitment of nurses. And we're starting to see the turnover of our nurses. And what that program ultimately is at the end of the day is it's a program that allows our nurses to fully disconnect when they go home. I think we hear a lot of times is, in a lot of these states where nurses are not required to be on site 24/7, it's 1 or maybe 2 nurses per building, and they're taking on a bulk of phone calls and answering the caregivers' questions. And so what we did is we created this triage program where our care staff can actually reach out, call a phone number, and it is our own nurses on our staff. They have full access to all the residents' charts and everything of that nature, which has allowed for our nurses and the director of nursing in these communities to be able to go home both in the evenings and on the weekends, and really take a second for themselves at the end of the day. So that's been something that we have rolled out that has really helped us from that regard, and super excited to continue to roll that out in 2025 from that aspect.
Yeah, I can see the value of that, because if you're the only nurse in a small building, or maybe responsible for a couple of buildings, right? When you go home, you feel like every time the phone rings, it could be work, and you can never disconnect. So that is really, really cool. I love that a lot.
Yeah, I've heard nurses. I mean, that's how it ultimately was born. Is we were sitting down, myself and a few others, and we were just talking to the nursing team and said, like, help us understand, like, what is your biggest challenge? And I'll never forget. This nurse said, I put my phone up when I take a shower. I put my phone up in the little ledge in the shower so I can see if a phone call is coming through. And I was like, something is really wrong if our nurses they can't even take a shower without having their phone right next to them.
Oh yeah, I mean, you just think, from showers and birthday parties with your kids and church and going out and all of those kinds of things. That is really, really cool. So as you sort of, one of the things that I'm always really curious about is there's a lot of discussion about how the needs of the emerging baby boomer, I'm a part of that generation, are going to be very different than it has been in the past. Do you have thoughts about how marketing and programming for boomers is different, needs to be different, will be different?
Yeah, I think what I think about it is it's still a lot to do with the geography and the demographics of your individual communities. And, one of the things that I believe is purpose is still a big portion, I think, of our current residents, but I think it's going to become an even bigger portion of what's to come with the baby boomers that are coming in. I think ultimately the way we look at boomers and kind of the next generation of individuals entering the market is, I really don't want to take a huge different approach, because at the end of the day, my focus is still to understand who is our current resident population and what drives the current resident population. And one of the things that we tell our teams frequently, which is most of the time, every single month, your resident population is changing to some extent, and you really got to make sure that you're taking the time to get to know your residents. And then, we have a framework of programming, but at the end of the day, the programming still has to be customized and tailored to those that are living in the community.
Yeah, I think about this so much as I'm old enough to qualify for senior living, and as I've worked with my stepdad when he was in senior living, I'd go visit him virtually every day. And as I'd walk by, the elevator was right where the primary activity room was for the community. And so often there'd be activities going on when he was, when I would go to see him. And I have to be honest, so many of the activities I looked at, I would think, if that's going to be my life, just shoot me. And so I do think that, purpose is the area that I think has so much opportunity. And I think it's a kind of a difficult thing to do in senior living. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about what you guys are doing in that area.
Yeah. So I think let me just take a step. I 100% agree with you. I mean, when you take a look at some of these activities, like, I would not want to participate in this. And I think that's one of the things as leaders, we have to take a step back and say, would we be willing to do the programming that we're putting out for our residents? And if we can't confidently say yes, then we really need to be putting time and attention in that area.
Yep.
Would I sit here and tell you today that if I looked at our calendars across the board that I would want to participate? No, but that is also why we've made a big shift over the last period of time, is to say, you know what, we really do need to take a look at programming and look at it differently. And, this exercise was done in a previous company that I worked for, and something that I challenge our team, which is, if we printed out all 38 of our calendars and took the names off of them, could you actually tell which community's program was where? The reality is, as an industry, that's not the case. It is, if I went and shopped 10 different properties here in Dallas, I would venture to say that most of the activity calendars look very similar to one another. And I think that's the piece where, we've got to continue to empower our team members, and we've got to stop allowing it to say, like, we've always, the death of words, right? We've always done it this way. The fact is, bingo, which is like one of my least favorite things to do. I don't enjoy it, but like I think about some of the people that do enjoy it that are not living in senior living, which is my parents who like to go to the casino to play bingo because they want to win money. They don't want to win a roll of toilet paper. And I think there's just a piece of our business where we've got to give individuals the tools to also say, you know what, it can be done differently. And I also think we have to reset expectations, because I think one of the challenges that we as leaders have put out there is this expectation that if you do a program that it needs to have all of this participation, when in reality, if you have 2 or 3 individuals engaged for that hour, that's still a success.
Yeah. And the bingo thing is really hard, right? Because I recognize there are people who really like bingo. Yeah. I mean, and when I go by this activity room and they have these things going on where I would sort of say, shoot me before I have to do that, they've got 10 or 15 residents, and maybe the residents really love it, or maybe they're just there because that's all there is. I don't really know. I do know that with my stepfather, he spent the first week in memory care, and there's a whole story behind why that happened, but they did actually get him out to an activity 1 or 2 times, and they did some sort of contest where he won them. And so he walked back to his room and he had these things. And so I walked in, I said, what's that? He said, oh, I won them at something. And I looked at these things, you talk about the toilet paper, which is just sort of bing, 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 right? Because I'm looking at this stuff, and these are the kinds of things I'd buy at the dollar store to give away to my church kids when they show up on time to my class. And they mean nothing to him. I mean, it's like, yeah, I won this. Now what? I just, again, shoot me if I'm going to be playing for a roll of toilet paper when I'm 85 and I have, I have enough money to pay $7,000 or $8,000 or $9,000 a month in service fees.
It's so true. And, I laugh because the moment I take away toilet paper, which we did in one of our communities, the first thing we did was get a negative review because we had taken away some of these gifts that they were used to getting. So, but part of it is that you just have to continue to take risks in what we're doing and continue to just challenge the status quo of what we've always done. And, I think about, like, at the end of the day, what gives me enjoyment, which I think a lot of us can look back and say, or look at our current lives and say, like, for me, it's I have my kids, which obviously that piece, and I imagine that that's an element of my life that never changes. I think about like my love for travel. And so how do we continue to bring that into the day-to-day? I was at a conference a few weeks ago or back in December, and one of the directors of Juilliard was there, which was super interesting in some of the programming that they're bringing in. And so I do think that there are groups outside of the industry that our industry is piquing their interest, and hopefully that will also help kind of increase our visibility and our abilities to bring unique programming to our residents.
Yeah. And I think so much of it is, when I look at, I'll give you a couple of examples. I have a friend who was an executive director, and I went to visit him and have lunch with him at his community a few months ago. And when I got there, I was a little early and he was finishing up a meeting. So I was just sort of wandering around, and there were a bunch of guys sitting around playing poker, and, and they were playing for real money. It was like, buy your chips for $10. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was still real money. And they were just having the best time, and they were talking. And I thought, man, they actually invited me to sit down. And if I didn't have to go meet with my friends, I would actually love to be able to do that. And I thought, that's the kind of programming. And I've been in a couple of buildings where I've spent the night, and I've gotten up early and gone into the dining room or the bistro. And there are just a bunch of guys having coffee, reading the paper, and talking to each other. And I think that sometimes we get so focused on having to have programs where what we really just need to do is put people in a space and maybe have some discussion starters or something. And that would be really, really high value.
I think it all becomes about fostering that social engagement. And to your point, everyone's definition of social engagement, for some people, it may be doing an activity, but for others, it may just be sitting around having coffee and talking about whatever it is that they want to talk about. And, and I think what's cool is that there is some technology out there that we're also implementing that can give you a lot better sense of who your residents are, and technology that's incorporating abilities to pair residents with similar interests so that you can do just that, as, create a coffee club for, maybe a sports enthusiast or something of that nature.
So are there any technologies that you're particularly excited about, enthusiastic about, or are there, maybe the other part of that question ought to be, are there technologies that need to be invented but haven't been yet?
So we made the choice late last year to roll out TSO Life to our communities. And so we've been in that journey of getting all of the resident interviews done. And so I think we see a lot of, we're very optimistic about the technology and kind of what we believe it can bring to our residents and bring to our life enrichment coordinators and their ability to kind of foster, again, that social engagement. I think we continue to look at, technology as a whole, and technology is, there's a lot of great technologies out there. It's just also understanding like what is going to accomplish what your, root issue is. And that's half the battle. It's just trying to kind of weed through all of the various ones. And, going back to that middle market is, everything has a cost, and, does that cost drive the ROI that makes sense to do it at the end of the day?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge. Is there's a lot of cool technology. Like I when coming back from CES this week, I've got a list of about 6 or 7 things that aren't even necessarily senior living related directly. A new webcam that I really like. There's this little tiny wearable camera that I'm looking at. I'm thinking, oh man, I could have so much fun with that. But it all costs money, right? And
right, exactly.
I found an easy way to spend a couple $1,000s. I probably won't, but probably a couple of them I'll get, but a couple of them I won't. And so, figuring out that the ROI on those things is always really, really tough. So one other question I have for you is, do you have any stories just about changed lives or that kind of thing that you'd be willing to share with us and our audience?
Yeah. And so I was, we talked about that a little bit. And, I was thinking about a specific family member that kind of came towards us that had a journey where they had visited and their loved one had been in several different communities. And this was actually a building that we were taking over, and just, the fear that was coming through. We were the third management company in like a 2.5-year period. So she not only had already moved her loved one into several buildings, now they were on their third management. And it was just this level of fear that I hadn't really seen in a while, frankly. And so I sat down and I had a long conversation, and it made me realize, again, really the importance of what we do and just the value that we bring, but also just how little control someone does have once they move into our communities. And I remember her and I talking about just the importance of her feeling comfortable again. And what was really cool was a few months after we took over the building, I got this email that just said, "Thank you. Your team has actually followed through on all the things that you said. And I have comfort now when I leave at the end of the day to make sure that my husband is still getting the care he needs, and I don't have to worry about it like I was." And so it just resonates with me, because I think that this story permeates throughout our entire industry of just the fear and the unknown. And we are seeing, I think this is probably, from what I have seen, like the most amount of changing of hands of buildings. And, management companies are coming and going. And at the end of the day, it's these residents and the team members that are the ones having to kind of deal with it. And I think that's the part where I remain super focused, even more so now after kind of just being reminded of this and the importance that we play in that aspect.
Yeah, that is a great story. And I think that, a big part of that in my mind is just that you were willing to take the time to sit down and listen Because as I went through my senior living journey, what I found is that my sense is that every time I had something that I thought I needed to talk to about with the leadership, it was sort of like, oh man, here we go again. I don't want to hear it. Just leave me alone. And of course, that just made me feel much more negative about them. So powerful story. Great way to end the show. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for joining me today. And with that, we will be back next Tuesday with an episode on what we saw at CES. So Justin, again, thank you very much. Jada in the background, thank you for producing this for us. And I hope you have a great weekend.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me on.